The acting Greens leader, Adam Bandt, joining us from our Melbourne studio. Thanks very much for your time. Let's start on Bridget McKenzie. So are you happy for the head of PM&C, Philip Gations, to handle what happens to Bridget McKenzie now?
No, that's why we need a federal ICAC. We need a national anti-corruption watchdog, and Bridget McKenzie should be referred to that. And then I think you'd have a bit of confidence that there was an independent investigation, because the only truly independent investigation so far that we've got from the Audit Office doesn't have teeth, but it's come up with some pretty damning findings, and a federal ICAC could get to the bottom of what has happened. And I mean, there'd be a long line as to who's going to be first referred. You've got Barnaby Joyce and water buybacks. You've got Angus Taylor and his dealings, and now Bridget McKenzie as well. It becomes clearer by the day as to why the Liberals don't want a federal anti-corruption watchdog, but that, I think, is what is necessary.
Right. Do you trust Philip Gations, though, to be independent and fair?
Well, I think you've got a Prime Minister who's personally benefited from the decisions that were made, and ultimately the head of the department is going to be responsible to the Prime Minister. You've got an Attorney General who, as I understand it, his electorate also personally benefited, and he's apparently conducting an inquiry as well. So you can't have people who've benefited from Bridget McKenzie's decisions being responsible either for investigating or be the boss of someone who's investigating.
But so you don't think he'll be able to be independent? You think he'll be under pressure from Scott Morrison, and his judgment on this will be affected?
Well, I think Scott Morrison's potentially, who knows, but Scott Morrison may have ticked off on all of this happening. Scott Morrison may have been fully aware that this is happening. There may be differences of interest here between Scott Morrison and Bridget McKenzie. Maybe Scott Morrison is getting ready to throw Bridget McKenzie under a bus, even though it was all hatched in Scott Morrison's office. Who knows? We just don't know. And that's why you need an independent ICAC to be able to investigate all of these matters. And we've been, I was the first one to introduce an ICAC bill in the lower house.
Clarify exactly what you're saying will be the influence here, that Philip Gations will be too worried about his future to be independent and to come out with his own findings on this.
Well, this isn't about him personally. This is about whether justice is going to be seen to be done, and as well as whether it's going to actually be done, and whether or not you're going to have arm's-length investigations, or whether you're going to have investigations being done by people who are answerable
that's the question.
To people who should be investigated.
You don't think he's arm's length as the head of a department?
I don't think as the head of a department it is arm's length. I think what we need is a federal ICAC, and that's not anything about him personally. I don't know about him personally, but when you've got issues like this where there's allegations that the Prime Minister's electorate has benefited perhaps unfairly, and same with the Attorney Generals, then that's got to be investigated by a federal anti-corruption watchdog.
Looking ahead to the next bushfire season, part of this Royal Commission from the Prime Minister, he says the most important thing, at least as important as climate change and more important for what Australia can do, is hazard reduction. In terms of what we can do before the next fire season, specifically, that's right, isn't it?
No, it's absolutely wrong. And the Prime Minister, by saying that, is putting lives at risk. I mean, this catastrophic summer, which isn't yet over, by the way, and we've got warnings today and people who are facing further threats today. This catastrophic summer, which of course started, in fact, barely only a couple of weeks out of winter, is happening with 1 degree of global warming. Scott Morrison's targets are consistent with 3 degrees of global warming, and the world is currently on track for about 3.4 degrees of global warming. A lot of this has been preventable. Had the world acted on global warming back when we first knew about it, it wouldn't have turned into the emergency that it has.
So but what I want to just focus on, where we are right now, Adam Bandt, in January of 2020, and where we're going to be in, say, November of 2020, not much can be done on climate change between now and then, but a lot different can be done in how we manage.
Absolutely disagree.
We'll come to that in a moment.
But absolutely disagree. That is absolutely the wrong approach. Now, more than ever, we are facing us hitting the 1.5 degree tipping point, which people said in the Paris Agreement we pledged to avoid, within the next decade. Okay, and decisions that get made
I want to talk about
now,
in a moment,
this year, within the next couple of years, we have no more
doesn't actually
time.
make sense. What are you saying? We can roll back emissions from the past 20 years in the next few months?
and saying that immediately, if we immediately have a plan to start phasing out coal and we immediately begin to cut back our pollution and begin a global lobbying effort to ask China and the US and Russia to do the same, then we will start to have a material impact on whether global warming gets worse and whether the climate crisis gets worse.
And begin a lobbying effort, even if that's accurate, that's not going to take effect by November of this year.
Well, it could. It could. When we introduced the carbon price, we saw emissions start to fall immediately, and the carbon price negotiated between the Greens and Labor and the Independents started working as soon as it was introduced. And over that 2-year period that it was in force, that's the only period in recent history that climate pollution has actually started to fall. So we know that if we have the will, we could act. We could come back to Parliament when it resumes in a couple of weeks and start cutting pollution immediately.
Emissions, which is 1.3% of the world. I mean, I understand what you're saying about the long term, and that's fine, and we've had guests on the program to push them on that. But the short term, it's crazy to talk about that as a solution for the next fire season. It might well help in 3, 4, 5 fire seasons, but not this one.
Well, of course, there's lots of things that we can do immediately for the upcoming fire seasons, and the government agreeing to meet with former emergency services leaders who've been saying that we need further equipment, we potentially need to look at increasing the number of firefighters that we have. All of those things are things that we could do, and the government hasn't done those either. And look, I know that you're angling, and the Prime Minister is out there saying that hazard reduction burns are the cause of everything. You know, hazard reduction burns aren't behind the drought. Hazard reduction burns aren't behind the barrier reef bleaching. And this is fuelled by the climate crisis, and it's what fire chiefs are saying. And I think you would find agreement across the Parliament, including from the Greens, to allow authorities to do the evidence-based hazard reduction burns that they say are necessary. And my understanding is that New South Wales did more than its allocated target. So this is a red herring. Hazard reduction burns from the government are a distraction strategy that presumably the government now wants to talk about for 6 months while it continues to delay climate action. And that will mean, come next fire season, if we don't talk about cutting our coal exports and cutting our emissions domestically, it's going to mean that forthcoming fire seasons are going to be worse and worse and worse. And again, I come back to the point. Government boasts about meeting its targets, and I say, so what? So what? Even if they do, those targets have us on track for over 3 degrees of warming.
We're a bit truncated today, so I'll have to leave it there. I know you've been tweeting about quitting coal immediately as a solution. We might get that into that next time, Adam Bandt. Thanks for your time today.